Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Between Sessions with Berries. Today's guest, I'm super excited to have him here today, is Michael Fulwiler. He's marketing strategist, copywriter, and creative director with over a decade of experience in mental health marketing. He's the creator of Therapy Marketer, a go-to newsletter for therapists, and the founder of Fullwiler Media, where he helps mental health brands grow through content marketing that actually works. He's also held leadership roles at Herd and the Gottman Institute, and today he's here to talk about the intersection of therapy, AI, and content, and how to make smarter marketing decisions without losing your voice. Michael, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Kim. Excited to be here. It's a great intro. I was listening back to a few of the most recent episodes of the podcast, and I have to say that you do great intros. So we're off to a good start.
Well, thank you. Yeah, AI helps me, I should say.
Sure, we can talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. So your background includes really big names. When I was reading your bio, I was like, this is so cool. So you were a marketer or like in a role at the Gottman Institute and with Herd. So how did you get started in mental health marketing and, into those places? I guess did you learn from the Gottman Institute or did you go in with a really strong marketing background? I'd love to just hear your history a little bit because I find that stuff so interesting.
No, to be completely honest, I got into mental health marketing by accident. I was an English literature major at the University of Washington. I thought that I was going to go to law school and be a lawyer. In my senior year, I got an internship at the Gottman Institute. It was a marketing internship and just really fell in love, both with marketing, but also with the mental health space. And that was in 2011. And so once I graduated in 2012, they offered me a full-time role. And I stayed at the Gottman Institute for almost 10 years. I was there for 8.5 years. By the end, I was the chief marketing officer. I had built out the entire marketing team there, and just such a wonderful opportunity for me.
I think you did a really good job being there because, who doesn't know who the Gottman Institute is at this point? They're like world renowned. So that's amazing. Content marketing. Let's talk about what that means a little bit because,
Sure.
I kind of know what it is, but maybe the average therapist listening, they probably are like, I don't even know what content marketing is. So maybe we could get into that a little bit and what that entails.
When people hear content marketing, they might think about posting on social media, or they might think about writing blog posts for your website, which these are forms of content marketing. But really, when it's distilled down, content marketing is a value exchange. And what I mean by that is, as a therapist, before you can ask for cash value for your services, it's important to provide use value through the form of content. And so by writing articles and blog posts for your website, by posting on social media, you're building trust, you're building authority, you're building thought leadership, all of these things that, are going to make clients more likely to book that first session with you. And so the way that I like to think about it is, providing use value, and that's very key. And we can talk about what that actually means, but that your content is valuable for people. It's helpful, it's educational. It can even be entertainment value, right? It doesn't have to be so serious all the time. There's therapists who have great, social media accounts that are just really funny, providing entertainment value, But really you're providing value, and that's a way to grow an audience, build your reputation, and make it more likely for potential clients, not just to reach out, but also to book that session with you.
Amazing. Let's talk about that. What is useful content versus maybe just just random stuff you throw out on the internet? There's a strategy behind this, right? How to be thoughtful in your content, how to incorporate it into your brand, and then how to make it helpful for people so they actually find that you care about helping them, I guess. Can we talk about that, the strategy behind it and how you go about that?
When I work with a company or with a therapist to build out a strategy for content marketing, it really starts with your audience. And really any marketing strategy, right, starts with the who. So who are you trying to reach with your content? And that's super important. As a therapist, that's your ideal client or the population, that you want to work with. And so once you've identified the who, then you can identify the types of problems that they have, the things that they're struggling with, the questions that they have, and then you can create content to, answer those questions that they have. And that's really going to provide them with value, right? These are things that they're struggling with. And so if, say they're an athlete who's struggling with like performance anxiety, if I come across a performance psychologist who's talking about these things on Instagram, that's going to pique my interest, right? It's speaking to me. Oh, this is really helpful. Let me check this person out. Let me go look at their website, right? So it really starts with the who. And I think where a lot of therapists kind of start to go wrong, or the mistake that they make with content marketing, is they don't have clarity on who they're creating content for. That's where I like to start.
Any tips for that? I mean, I feel like it's niching down, right? Or like figuring out like who am I actually
Exactly,
speaking
yeah.
to? Do you have tips for that? Because I hear that a lot too, like in the coaching realm, people come to me and say, I don't know,
Yeah.
I just want to like teach people about anxiety or whatever. And it's like, well, that's probably not going to work because everybody's talking about anxiety. You need it to be like specifically about this person with anxiety, right?
So when we talk about, defining your audience for content, or even your ideal client, your niche for your therapy practice, it really has two components. One is a demographic, right? So, a type of person, say it's working moms. So that's kind of the demographic or the population. And then there also is a second part, and this part I think gets overlooked, and that's the presenting concern, to use clinical language, right? It's like, what is the problem that they're struggling with? It's working moms struggling with burnout or something like that, right? So it's like, that's a great niche. And so it's a demographic and then a problem. And so when you're starting to think about, or even refining who you think your target audience is for your content, or your ideal client for your therapy practice, it really needs to check both of those boxes.
So once you've figured that part out, how does that translate then into like, I mean, I could see how with blog posts, but like for somebody listening that maybe has never even thought about having an Instagram account or something like that, how do you take that niche and then translate it into something special out there that's actually going to attract a client to you?
Yeah. So I think for a lot of fields, coming up with content ideas for social media, for example, for email, for blogging can be a challenge. Like, you really need to do audience research, keyword research. But for a therapist, like, you're talking in theory, right? You're talking to your ideal clients every day, and so you should have a general idea of the types of things that they're struggling with, the questions that they have. These are questions that you're getting on if you're offering consultation calls or your intake calls in session, right? Obviously, you're not disclosing confidential, conversations you're having with clients, but if you're starting to see themes come up in your practice, those are great ideas and can be inspiration for topics to create content around. And when we start to get to, okay, I've identified who I'm creating content for, who my audience is. Now I'm sort of moving into, what am I creating content about? I would recommend sticking to what I would call content pillars. So say 2 or 3 things. These are the things that I'm going to talk about related to my niche and, experience and expertise as it relates to the specific population or audience that I'm trying to reach.
So like the burnout mom, for example, a niche that you might have, what would be an example of like content pillars for that somebody listening could learn how to develop their own content pillars? Because I guess, is it different for every person, like what the content pillars would be, or is it kind of the same pillars for everybody? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So in that example, right, like you could have a whole content series or a whole content pillar on like signs of burnout, like how to recognize that you're approaching or in burnout, right? And so that's like a pillar. And then you could have a pillar on sort of what to do once you've recognized that you've reached burnout. So sort of what are the strategies or kind of like interventions, right? Like once you've reached burnout. And then I think as a therapist too, as you're building your personal brand online, like it's also okay to share some like personal stuff too. And, as it relates to, self-disclosure, everyone needs to kind of do what they're most comfortable with. But like I've seen that be a successful content pillar as well. Someone talking about, say, their own experience as as a mom who has burned out, and that's why it led them to work with this particular population, right? So they're talking about their own story and background, and that could be a great kind of third pillar for your content. It makes you, relatable to your audience.
We've really seen a shift, I think, over the last like 5 to 8 years, I guess, with like, it used to be no self-disclosure, but now I feel like every therapist on Instagram or whatever that's trying to
Right.
attract new clients, I mean, super personal stuff. Like I was right where you are and this is how I got through it kind of thing. So you feel like that's a good strategy if you're comfortable, I guess, with disclosing your story.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the kind of the rule of thumb that I've heard, and I've asked therapists about this extensively, is
Yeah.
that like if it's in service of the client, then it's
Yeah.
okay to talk about it and
Mm.
disclose, right? If it's going to help build rapport, build that therapeutic alliance in a relationship. If it's like in service of you, then you probably should just keep that to yourself. But yeah, I don't know. I think again, like it's a personal preference,
Yeah.
but I think that when someone is looking for a therapist, it's a very different buying decision, right? Than
Yeah.
looking for an electrician or like
Mm-hmm.
looking for a plumber to come to my house, right?
Yeah.
Like if I'm looking for like a service provider like that, I'm probably looking at their reviews, like are there testimonials? Like with a therapist, it's a much more personal, kind of an emotional decision. And so,
Mhm.
I'm looking for someone who I feel like I could relate to, who would understand me, who, I would get along with. And so,
Mm.
the more that you can show that kind of who you are, show up authentically in your content, I think you're going to attract people who are like-minded and you're going to attract clients that you want to work with.
Mhm.
And maybe that might turn some people off depending on your content. Like I have a friend, Patrick Casal, who we were just chatting about, like he curses in his content. If you look at his
Yeah.
website, he has curse words on his website. That's just like who he is.
Mhm. Yeah.
And like some therapists might say, like, I would never do that, but he
Mhm.
does, and that's who he is. And I think that authenticity is a big part of why he's successful because he, attracts people who are like, oh wow, I love that this guy is just like unfiltered and
Mhm.
himself. He's someone that I feel like I could work with.
Right. That makes perfect sense. It's part of his brand, right? He cusses a lot.
Yeah,
Or,
right,
knowing Patrick, he likes Lord of the Rings, like I kind of know his brand a
right,
little bit, that
exactly.
that's kind of his
Yeah,
personality and he puts it out there. Yeah, exactly. So if you're comfortable with it, I like that. If it's your comfort level and then putting it out there so your client can figure out if they relate to you or not, and then they want to work with you and they figure out, yeah, you love Game of
yeah, and
Thrones.
I think
Yeah.
there's a line, right? Like I think that kind of like sharing your interests can be helpful. Like there's another therapist I know who like loves Disney, and that's like a big part of what they post about, and like that's great, But if you're posting like what you had for lunch today, it's like I don't know that people are really going to care
Yeah.
about that. So then that sort of becomes like more of like a personal Instagram page, right? Versus like kind of as a brand for your therapy practice.
That's
So
cool.
I think there's a line I would probably draw there. We're not like sharing everything that's happening in our personal lives. And some therapists that I'm connected with, they'll share about themselves, but maybe they won't post about their romantic relationship or they won't share their kids, right? Like there's parts of their life that they keep private, even though they disclose things about themselves. And that's
Right.
intentional.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, if I want to work with burnout moms, I probably want to talk about being burned out sometimes and the kids that I have. Yeah,
Right.
if you feel comfortable with it. Yeah. So, can we talk about AI? I mean, that's a big topic, especially with content creation. In fact, I
Yeah.
just did a webinar recently that taught therapists how to build social media content creation machines using AI. So, I'd love to talk about like your thought on it and like the do's
Yeah.
and the don'ts and how to help people, do it. If you don't think they should use AI, like what should they
Yeah.
do to make that an easy process for them?
Well, I know before we hit record, I was sharing with you that, you are one of the first therapists that I saw talk about AI. Like everyone talks about AI now, right?
Yeah.
But you've been talking about AI for a long time. And so you really know this stuff. I'm curious your take on this. So my general perspective, and I will say that it's still forming because this is all very new, is
Mhm.
that in general, I wouldn't recommend using AI to create content.
Mhm.
So, using AI to write posts for LinkedIn, for example, or using a like AI video avatar of yourself to create videos on social media. Like, I just think as a therapist, going back to authenticity, I think authenticity is so important in how you connect with potential clients. I think AI is not good enough yet that you can't tell if it was written by AI or created by AI or not. Like, I think we still, as like humans, have a pretty good gauge of what's AI and what's not. So I think when it comes to content creation, I think that my recommendation would be in general to stay away from using AI. I think it can feel like a shortcut, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I can just put in ChatGPT, write me 10 LinkedIn posts or write me a blog post. And it's much more efficient. But I think you lose that authenticity. I think you
Yeah.
also lose originality, right? This is an argument that I've heard. Like, if you're using AI to write 10 LinkedIn posts about anxiety, like someone else could use AI to write the exact same posts, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, it's not original. With that said, I think there are definitely opportunities to use AI in content marketing. I think a big one is in doing research, like coming up with topics. That's something that I use ChatGPT for. I'll
Nice.
like ask ChatGPT questions and try to brainstorm, kind of use it as like a research assistant. I also think in kind of like content production, you could take this podcast recording, use AI to cut up clips for social media. I think that's a great use case for AI. So I'm,
Yeah,
I'm curious your
absolutely.
reaction to that take as someone who teaches
Yeah,
therapists how to
no,
use
I
AI.
agree with that, and I really run into that a lot, especially like in my clinical AI club. A lot of people come in and they're like, "Yeah, I'm trying to use ChatGPT to write social media, and it sounds terrible. Nobody clicks. I get no engagement,
Right.
that sort of thing."
Right.
So I do a lot of coaching around, developing what your brand is in the
Yeah.
first point, like you're talking about, like first, like you're just what you're saying, my niche, what's my brand, what's my personality, all of those things that make you unique in you. And then you've got to train the AI to know who you are, how you talk by uploading like content that, transcripts of how you
Right.
talk to people, that sort of thing. So I feel like if you're not doing that, in the beginning, it's going to be terrible, and then,
Yeah.
once it does create content for you, like reading it back out loud and asking yourself, does this sound like AI wrote this? And if it does, going back in and training again and saying, I need you to sound like a human. Like, look at this transcript. This is how
Right.
I talk. I use contractions. I don't say, I cannot. I say can't, or if it's Patrick, I
Hmm.
cuss a lot,
Right.
So trying to like really nuance that out, and then of course still having like a super critical eye if you go back and use it, because there's tons of like giveaways, like the M dashes,
Yeah.
and there's like kind of cliches it does that just sounds very AI. So I think being like really well versed in that before you try to just go hop on ChatGPT and write a social media post is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you are going to use AI to create content, I think the important like step that you're mentioning here is use it as a way to create a first draft, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like have it draft something for you and then edit it, change it into your own voice. So, if it can get it 75% of the way there,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can take that and then you can edit it to sound like you, maybe add more of a unique perspective or, something that you feel strongly about or whatever, that feels more unique. Then I think that's okay too.
Yeah, totally. And I'm kind of getting into like the Sora videos of myself lately. That basically Sora is like ChatGPT's
Yeah.
video content creation for anybody listening in. You
Yeah.
can like upload a cameo, like it's a video of yourself, and then you just tell it to do things like you're sitting at your desk typing, and it looks like a video of you. I mean, you could tell it's AI,
Yeah.
but it also it's interesting because I've like tested these. Like I'll put some of the AI ones on, and it's really interesting because I get a lot of engagement on the AI ones. Not people saying, "Oh my God, that's AI," but just like people stopping and looking, trying to
Yeah.
figure out if it is AI. So I don't know.
Right.
For my brand using AI, that's been an interesting journey, and I wonder in the future how that's going to be with just therapists, like marketing, that sort of thing. Like as we incorporate AI more into like the therapy room, if that's going to be a marketing strategy in
Yeah.
the future, I don't know. Just interesting to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. I know I was on Psychology Today recently because I was looking into therapists who had uploaded videos to Psychology Today.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you've seen this, but now in the Psychology Today feed, so if you search for a therapist in Providence, Rhode Island, which is where I live, right? You get the results, and then about halfway down the page, there's videos of therapists who've uploaded a video to their Psychology Today profile. So they're actually showing up now in the search results to, I think, probably just encourage people to upload videos.
Yeah.
And I was scrolling through those videos just to get a sense of what these videos looked like. And I think the third or fourth one that I watched was like very, like very clearly an AI video.
Oh,
And
no.
it's just like, I don't know, for me, it's like,
Yeah.
okay,
It's like
like this
weird.
guy clearly just like made this video, and it's just like very obviously like his hands, you know, they have like the AI thing. And it's just like, I don't
That's
know, it
funny.
doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
Now I think if like for you, AI is part of your brand and your content
Yeah.
and what you talk about. And like, so I think it's okay that you're experimenting with AI to create content, and people might even expect that from you. And I think that would be cool for you to like use AI to create content, share it, talk about it, get people's reaction, like create a conversation about it. Like, I think that's an
Yeah.
interesting way to think about it versus like, I'm just going to use this AI tool to create this like intro video of myself because, you know, I don't want to record a video, or it's just easier to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I'm so curious to see how it's going to evolve because, as you said, I've been into it for a long time and I'm kind of a real geek when it comes to it and trying to figure out. I'm always actually trying to find shortcuts, and that's why I'm so obsessed with AI, I think,
Yeah.
and trying to figure out a way to get really good content creation because it's like soul sucking for a lot of therapists, you know, to be able to do that.
Right.
And I think places like your newsletter, I downloaded its really great newsletter, you know, offer a lot of really good strategies to help therapists move along with this without using AI. There's tips, tricks, that sort of thing in there to help therapists like get really easy content creation. I think that's amazing because it's the hardest part of it. I think, you know, everybody just wants to be a therapist, but then you've got to worry about all this other stuff on top of it, you know?
Definitely. Yeah. And that's something that I tell therapists all the time. I actually just had a call with a therapist this week who asked me, do I need to be on Instagram? I feel like all of my colleagues are on Instagram. I'm not on Instagram. And I said, well, why do you, why do you need to be on Instagram? Do you need clients? And she said, well, no, like my practice is full. And I was like, okay, well, if you don't need it for your business and it's not something that you particularly enjoy doing, you know, if you're not someone who likes to create content and you're on Instagram as someone who's consuming content on the platform, then no, I don't think you need to be on Instagram, right? So I think there's this pressure that a lot of therapists feel when it comes to creating content, being on social media. It's like, well, I feel like I need to because other people are. And so I guess that gives hopefully permission for people not to if they don't feel like they want to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that message. Definitely. You don't have to just like do what everybody else is doing to try to get clients. What are some other ways that people can content market without being on like social media that you recommend or help people with?
I mean, I think this is a great way to kind of do content marketing, right? Is either host a podcast, partner with a company who, you know, is hosting a podcast like you're doing, or even be a guest on a podcast, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this will go on YouTube, right? And it'll go on
Yeah.
social media. And so this is a great way to kind of do content marketing in a sort of more like, just, it's like a low key way, right? Like you can just come on, have a conversation, and then this like content is created from it, which is great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, social media is just one way, right? Like I'm a huge fan of email marketing,
Yeah.
which is like a whole
Yes.
nother conversation to be had.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, what I'll say about email is that email is what I would describe as an owned audience, meaning you have a direct relationship with your email subscribers. Whereas if you build an audience on social media, I would describe that as a borrowed audience, right? Like you're at the mercy of an algorithm. You're building this audience on a third party platform. You could have a huge TikTok following, and then TikTok could go away.
Yeah.
And so I'm always talking to therapists about building an email list. It's way more defensible. And so as you're thinking about, you know, doing content marketing and building an audience, how are you getting people onto an email list? Are you offering what what we would call a lead magnet, some kind of like downloadable content that people can give their email for. Maybe you're hosting a free webinar is another great content marketing tactic. And, people sign up for that webinar, give their email address. So I'm always thinking about, the content I'm creating. Okay, the end goal is to get people to join my email list, because then once they're on my email list, then I can continue to provide them value, kind of going back to what we talked about in the beginning, through a weekly newsletter that's helpful for them. And at some point, if I have a course that I'm offering, or, a product that I'm selling, now I have this audience that I can, offer that to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know that my email list is gold. I mean, it's, I've built it for years, and it's just so important to do that and have it. I have lots of Facebook groups, but it literally could go away tomorrow. I've heard people get their group shut down for weird reasons, for no reason, really.
Right.
So it's definitely scary to think about not having your own list somewhere. So a freebie or like a lead magnet, do you have any tips around that? Like cause people ask me that a lot. It's like, well, I don't know what to offer, or how do I even come up with that? Do you
Yeah.
have any tips on how to think of a freebie to get people on your email list?
Yeah. I mean, I think that going back to, content marketing being a value exchange, I feel like I've said value 100 times. It's like, it just needs to be
It's
valuable. It
important.
needs to be helpful, right?
Yeah.
I think, if you're just putting something up that isn't helpful, people aren't going to, they're not going to want it, right? But if you have like a private practice checklist, for example, and you are marketing to therapists, or your audience is therapists who are starting in private practice, that's a great example of a lead magnet, or what I would call gated content, meaning you have to give your email address in order to get access to it. So I think when I think about like a lead magnet, typically it could be like a one-page PDF. So
Yeah.
a checklist, a cheat sheet, something like that. I think on my newsletter website, I have like a marketing cheat sheet. So like
Yeah.
that's one option. I've also seen people offer like ebooks as a kind of free download. If you do a webinar, you could just take the video recording and offer that as well.
Nice.
Is something that I've seen, or even just creating like a 5, 10, 15-minute video on a particular topic. But I think something that is helpful to your target audience, I think,
Yeah.
is sort of where I would start. And if there's, a particular topic that you find resonates most with your audience, going back to those content pillars we had talked about,
Yeah.
that's like a good place to focus, I would say.
Nice.
So at Herd, for example, we found that whenever we talked about tax write-offs or tax deductions,
Oh,
it
yeah.
got a lot of engagement, right? Because
Everybody
as a
wants
therapist,
that.
who wouldn't want to save money on their taxes, right? And so we wrote a guide to tax write-offs for therapists. And if you search Google tax write-offs for therapists, it's the number one search result now that comes up.
Wow.
And now if you click on that guide, within the guide, kind of in the, like in line, there's a button where you can download a tax deduction cheat sheet for therapists, right? So it's associated with the blog post, or the on-site content, and then it's a free download.
Really
And that
smart.
has been, downloaded a bunch of times and generated a lot of emails for the Herd email list.
That's amazing. Yeah, really cool. So can we talk about Therapy Marketer and how you like decided to start that, and what you do and how you
Sure.
help therapists through that business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that I worked for the Gottman Institute for 8.5 years. And when I left, I really wanted to help therapists with marketing. And I couldn't help like enough people. Like I couldn't help all of the therapists that I wanted to help as a service business. And so I started that newsletter as a way to just kind of extend kind of my reach and share knowledge, and, hopefully help more therapists. And so I think I started it in 2020, 2021. So I've been writing it
Wow.
for about 5 years now, and it has like just over 3,000 therapists on the list. And yeah, so I really share, like, a lot of it is, like very kind of distilled down takeaways for folks. My goal is like each newsletter there should just be like one thing that people can take away and apply to their practice.
Nice.
And so some of that is just like kind of general marketing and branding, kind of like concepts that I distill down for therapists, but also it's just what I'm learning, like things that I'm reading, things that I'm seeing. And AI is something I've been talking about more recently, which isn't something that I talked about 5 years ago, right? Because it just wasn't really like a thing yet. So yeah, I'm also just kind of sharing what I'm learning and also sharing kind of like my point of view or perspective on it. And I think that's important when we think about content, right? Is like, what is my point of view? What is my perspective? What am I adding to this topic or conversation? Otherwise, like someone could probably just search on ChatGPT for that answer, right?
Right. You're not just like regurgitating information. You're actually putting like your
Right.
unique spin on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. Have you been talking much about, AI becoming a search engine and marketing? So you're showing up on ChatGPT. That's, really been a hot topic.
Yeah.
People have been asking me about
Yep.
like the ask engine optimization versus, SEO and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. Just wonder if you're in that realm at all.
I am. Yeah. This is one of I laugh because I feel like what I'm starting to see on LinkedIn in particular is like SEO is dead. And
Yeah.
I saw this post yesterday. It was like blogging is dead. Like, I don't know about every time something new comes out, people always think like the old thing is
Yeah.
dead or doesn't exist. People love to say that.
Yeah. It's a good
But
hook,
what
too.
we know, yeah, no, exactly. It's like good engagement bait, I guess.
Yeah.
But what we know about like what I've heard is it's called GEO, generative engine optimization, or
Okay.
like SEO for AI. It's the same kind of basic principles that apply to SEO. And so when you search on ChatGPT, right, like when you're using an AI tool, it's largely pulling results from Google and search engines. And so it's like the same kind of basic SEO principles will help you to show up in AI search. And so
Nice.
I would be somewhat wary of people who claim to be like AI search or, LLM like experts, just because it's like also new.
Yeah.
Then there's definitely an opportunity, right, for people to come in and help companies show up in AI searches. But the one thing that I have seen about AI search versus Google search is that historically Google really values backlinks, so like links to your website,
Ooh.
right? So if there's a lot of websites that link to your website, especially if those other websites are what Google would consider high authority, so they get a lot of traffic, they have content. If those websites link to your website, Google would consider your website high authority. And so
Yeah.
that's why you kind of backlinking is kind of an SEO strategy, right? Like getting other websites to link to your website. What I've heard with AI search is it's less about backlinking and more just about your name or your brand being mentioned. And so if you're like being mentioned on other websites or people are talking about you or your brand or you're appearing on podcasts or maybe you're guest blogging or you're sort of like your name is showing up, it's kind of more about
Yeah.
frequency, if that makes sense. And so like the actual link itself isn't as important. It's more about the mention because AI is just like searching the internet essentially for mentions of you and your brand. So that's like one thing that I've heard as a difference. So take that for what it is.
Yeah.
But I think the takeaway for me, at least at this point, is like creating content for your website that, shows expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, that EAT that you see in SEO.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing that and you're showing up on Google search, like the likelihood that you're going to show up in AI search is pretty good.
That's great. Those are great tips. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, who knows where it's
So
going to
something
be?
else.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's always changing. And something else I would just add, and we saw this at Herd over the last like year or so, is that, I mentioned if you search tax deductions or tax write-offs for therapists, historically, what you get back, right, is like a list of links.
Yeah.
And so you'd click the first link or the second link and you'd go to the website and you'd read the content. Now, what a lot of people do is they search tax write-offs for therapists or tax deductions for therapists. And instead of clicking through to the link in the search result, they just read the AI summary. So that's what shows up now at the top of the search result. So we're seeing click-through rate go down because of that. Now, that AI summary is pulling from sources, right? So, people are still could be seeing your name or your brand mentioned, but that's something it's making it more difficult. And it's one sort of reason why I think people now are saying that SEO, isn't as effective. But I don't know. I'm not convinced that it doesn't. I don't think that it means that SEO is dead or it's not something that you should be investing in still.
Definitely. I mean, it couldn't hurt to put yourself all over the place with backlinks and that sort of thing. I mean, that couldn't be a bad strategy, I don't think. Yeah. Yeah. And then it would feed the AI too, the generative search too, if you're showing up all over the place that way too. Very interesting. So thank you. So many good tips and strategies and just helping people get from a starting point, because I think it really is. And I'm sure you've seen it over your career just for therapists. It's just, this is such a hard topic for therapists. How do I market myself? So how do you help therapists market themselves? What do you, we had the Therapy Marketer, the wonderful newsletter and that sort of thing, but what do you do strategy wise, or how do you work with therapists, just for somebody that's listening and might want to look you up and talk to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I offer marketing consulting calls. So these are just 60-minute, conversations. If you're listening and you're like, wow, this sounds really interesting, or I have a particular question, or there's something that I've been trying to figure out and it's just not working, I'd love to jump on a call. And that's the best way to just pick my brain. And then also I do kind of longer term engagements as well. Say where I'll work with therapists kind of on an ongoing basis, and we meet once a month or twice a month, and we kind of talk about their practice and what's going on, and I'll give them, kind of a roadmap to follow.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds really helpful. And do you mainly focus on therapists that are just focused on their private practice, or do you help with other side income, side hustles, that sort of thing? Somebody like me, maybe that's got, clients, but also maybe some other income streams and trying to market that way. Do you help with that as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Nice.
I would say, it's therapists who are kind of just getting started and they're just trying to figure out how do I market myself, what are sort of the basic kind of marketing foundations that I need to set up. Who is my ideal client? Trying to, figure that out, right? What is my niche? And then, yes, I also work with therapists who, maybe they're full in their private practice and they're interested in exploring other income streams, for example, or they're expanding into a group practice, or maybe they want to cut down on their caseload a little bit so they can do kind of other stuff, or maybe they're a practice that's launching kind of a new offering for their, business. I work with a group practice who's now offering leadership consulting. And so we've talked about, okay, how do we get that off the ground and come up with a marketing plan for that? Because when you introduce a new service, right, the way that you market that service might be different than kind of what you're used to doing just to get therapy clients.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's a different genre altogether, leadership versus how do I get another client in the door kind of thing. Yeah. That's so cool. Right. So where do people find you? What's the websites or the links where they go to find you?
So my personal website is just my name, michaelfulwiler.com. My newsletter is therapymarketer.co, just because therapymarketer.com was taken, unfortunately. So if you own that, want to sell it to me, we should talk. But if you just Google Therapy Marketer as well, hopefully my SEO is good enough that it will show up. But yeah, and in terms of social media, I find myself more active these days on LinkedIn. Going back to social media platforms changing, I used to be more active on Twitter, and just Twitter has changed a lot in the last, few years. And I've noticed the community that I kind of was engaging with on Twitter is now more on LinkedIn. And so I find myself more on LinkedIn these days. So I think if you're looking to connect on social media, I would connect with me there.
Yay. I definitely follow you over there. And I love your posts. They're very interesting and informative. They're always interesting. Yeah. I'm like, what's he talking about today? Yeah. Right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time today. This is super helpful. I think it's going to help a lot of people just kind of get over that hump and figure out how to start marketing their practice better.